Hello team, this is Reverend Mary Ambuka, and I'm happy today that as I had promised, I wanted to start teaching on the book of First Corinthians. Friend, it is interesting that most people don't know, but every book in the Bible is written in a certain context. What was happening at that particular time, the location, the culture, and the concept of that particular time that book was written. So even as I pick from the book of First Corinthians, I want to do the introduction and just know why it was written, where was it written, what context was it written, and the historical background, where exactly was Corinth. And when we pick it from there, we'll understand every chapter that that Paul wrote, why he wrote it, and how he was answering the questions and the problems that were in the Corinth church. And then we'll, as we pick from there, really we'll know the context that every chapter of this book was written in. And friend, this book of First Corinthians has 16 chapters. 16 chapters from chapter number 1 to chapter number 16. So we are going to check the historical and the contextual background that this epistle was written and was set. Very interesting that there's some things that happen in our culture today, in the church, and we find people coming with stories that women are not supposed to minister. Women should keep quiet in the church. When we look at the book of Corinth, and also they quote the book of Corinthians that Paul wrote, but we'll come to realize, friend, that there's a context, there's the reason why it was written, and where it was written, and also what was happening at that particular time. Very interesting. And then many of our questions will be answered, and we'll have that peace that is going to answer our questions even as we continue. So the background information that you get from the book of First Corinthians is that First and Second Corinthian epistles were written by Paul himself, Paul the Apostle. And they are very useful and relevant to the church at all ages. The issues that the church of Corinth was struggling with remain a challenge even today. And therefore these letters were written in a setting different also from our churches today, a totally different setting. So and as such, it is important to reconstruct their historical situation in order that we may uncover the issues that they struggled with in light of their contexts. Friend, the Bible is about the context. So we are going to look at their context. And even as today, there is a context that we are in. And therefore, as we merge them together, we are going to understand the book of Corinthians. So this is what will enable us also to render the right interpretation to the passages that are in this book. So we'll now look at the city of Corinth, the church at Corinth, and why Paul wrote this letter to the church of Corinth. Come with me. The city of Corinth. The city of Corinth was the capital city of Achaia and was perhaps the most important city in Greece. So what kind of city was Corinth? It was a very rich city. It was a busy seaport, the commercial capital of Greece. It was also a center of business and trade. When traveling by land and sea, everyone chose to go and to pass through Corinth. I can give an example like here in Kenya. We talk of Mombasa Port. Mombasa Port is where most cargoes that come by sea go through the port. So it was just like Mombasa City, the county of Mombasa. Also, it was a mixed city. As a Greek-speaking Roman colony, it attracted all kinds of people, both Jews and Greeks. And also it had a collection of business persons, philosophers, sailors, and slaves were found in the city of Corinth. I'm just giving a background so that we know when we are talking of the book of Corinthians and the Corinthians church, we just see where it was located and why they had the problems that they had. Also, it was an immoral city, like most seaports are. Corinth was a center for sexual vice. To live like a Corinth meant to live a life of drunkenness and immorality, because these are the characters that happen in every port of entry, especially if there is a sea that is in that city. Again, it had a temple dedicated to Aphrodite, Greek goddess of love. It had 1,000 sacred prostitutes. It also had a temple that had statues of unclothed human figures to glorify male beauty, which led to homosexuality in Corinth. So friend, most of the time it is good, before you take any book of the Bible, it is good to know the background. It is good to know the setup. It is good to know the culture, so that when that book is being written, you see why it was written and what was the context. So with that, you understand as you continue reading the book. Again, it was a very proud city. It was popular because of his hosting the games. At that particular time, there were games that looked like the Olympic Games. And therefore we find that it was a very busy city with things were going on and things were happening. It had a population of 200,000 people. It was a city obsessed with wealth and sex. Proud of its fame, with a rich variety of religion and culture and rapid progress. It was a center of Greek culture. It was characterized by typical Greek culture. People were interested in Greek philosophy and placed high regard in wisdom. Although they were wise in worldly terms, they lacked divine wisdom. And therefore we found that this city was a populated city, filled with every kind of vice and worldly pleasures. The Corinthians were known for certain characteristics which affected the Christian community as well. So they respected human wisdom and philosophy. They valued eloquent speech and debating skills. They prided themselves on their worldly and religious knowledge. The people who thought that they knew too much because of the philosophies that were happening at that time. They were enslaved by sexual appetite, like our old coastal cities. They had philosophical basis teachings that spiritual experience has nothing to do with the body. That was the teaching that was happening in the city of Corinth. So, a spiritual man could also be sexually immoral without being called carnal, because the body did not matter. They were great believers in personal freedom. They were strong individualists, and each used to do their own thing. 1 Corinthians chapter 5, chapter 8. Again, it contributed to political divisions in the church. Others took their brothers to court. So, it was just a city that the world had gotten into the church. And even as we go on, we come to realize now why Paul had to write a letter to the church of Corinth. So the church of Corinth, it is Paul who founded it during his second missionary journey, when we see in Acts chapter 16 and also in chapter 18. And as we continue, we'll read them as we go on. So he ministered to the church for 1.5 years. The church consisted of both born-again Jews, converted, God-fearing Gentiles, and former pagans. So this sounds like a typical mixture that we see in our churches today. We have the born-again and the not born-again, and yet they come to church every Sunday. So there was a mixture of people who had come to the church of Corinth. So after his ministry here, Paul left Corinth and went to Ephesus. After he left the church, the church experienced serious problems. So in response to the chaos that were going on in the church, Paul dealt with sin, chapters 1 to 6, and answered questions that were being asked, chapter 7 to 16. He also discussed about marriage, which is very interesting. We are going to pick it as we go on, chapter 7. And something very interesting about chapter 7 is that there was a letter that Paul received, that there was somebody who had married his father's wife. And as we continue reading, we'll come to realize that this woman that this man had married, it seems like the wife to this man died. Then he married. After he married, the firstborn of this man started having an affair with this woman that was married by his father. So that is now when Paul got news and now wrote about marriage in chapter 7. Again, when we come to chapter 8 and 10 through to 10, he addressed idolatry. Chapter 11, he addressed public worship. Spiritual gifts, chapter 12 to 14. Then resurrection, chapter number 15. And he concludes with chapter 16, talking about the special gifts he was taking now to Jerusalem. So after Paul had planted the church, the city got into the church. You remember when I was starting, I said that now the city of Corinth had many kinds of people that had come into that city. And therefore, the city got into the church. So the reason why it experienced so many problems, it is because now the city got into the church. And so the believers in Corinth needed to heed to Romans chapter 12 verse 2. And so do us today. What does Romans chapter 12 verse 2 says? It says, do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is. His good, pleasing, and perfect will. So although the church was meant to influence their world at that time, it was the other way round. The church now entered, the world now entered into the church. And now, this is now why Paul is writing this letter to the church of Corinth. Why? Let me pick it again. Because the world entered into the church. And friend, that is now even what we are dealing with now as the church, because the world has entered into the church. So I'll pick it from there as I talk about the characteristics of the church of Corinth from 1 Corinthians view. Then we will walk this journey as we understand why Paul said that women should keep quiet in the church. Friend, It was the context. It was the culture. It was what was happening at that particular time. Then we will understand the book of 1 Corinthians. This is a very interesting journey. You'll love it. God bless you as you keep on tuning here, because this is the place where our eyes are going to be opened about the gospel of our Lord Jesus Christ. May God bless you.